Hi and welcome back to this new video in which I want to show you a nice thing you can do when you have control of your proxy. And this is the follow-up on the previous video where I show you how easy it is to create a proxy with C# using the YARP, the Microsoft Reverse Proxy. In this video, I want to show you how you can manipulate the result. And to do this, I want to show you how I can and how I use Perplexity inside my GitHub Copilot. Well, you already know the game. I'm using litellm-proxy and I have full support to Perplexity AI. So I can use Perplexity through API. Perplexity expose usage through API. And if you have a pro account, you have $5 of API usage each month, and then you have to pay. And you have all the information you need. Also, you can use different model, okay? So for this example, I will use the Sonar Pro. And so I've configured my model in the litellm-proxy, and I have a PPX model I call Perplexity. And PPX model is the model that is bound to Sonar Pro, so it's standard Perplexity search with Pro account. Now, clearly, this works out of the box. So when you have your when you use Ollama, you launch my proxy and you choose Ollama, and you are directed to the litellm-proxy. So you see you can use the PPX model. But the idea is you have now I have a chunk manipulator, because when you talk to a large language model, usually GitHub Copilot use always the streaming support. The streaming support allow the large language model to generate token by token and send back to the caller piece by piece. So the answer is being composed over time, so the user see that the answer is composing instead of looking at all the answer once it's done. And I want to do some manipulation, and I created the chunk manipulator. To be honest, this is all vibe coded by Cloud Code. So it's code that I don't really need to understand how it works. I just made a small adjustment, but vibe coding is especially useful for writing quickly tool like this, because I don't care to have really full production code or complex code. I can instruct, I can ask to Claude to simply manipulate the YARP request and response. And since YARP is a well-known library, Claude has no problem in doing this. Actually, what I want is to get the citation, because Perplexity is not a standard large language model. It is using a large language model to perform a research. So what I have is actually a web research mediated by the Sonar model of Perplexity. And in the answer, Perplexity gives you the citation. And the citations are the site that Perplexity read to answer your question. And so since this answer is included in the chunk, I want this to surface in GitHub Copilot. But GitHub Copilot actually does not know anything about citation, because it's interested only in the tokens returned by the call, because it knows that it's talking to a standard large language model, so there's no need to have citation. To solve this problem is really simple, because you have chunking. What's the chunk? When you ask to a large language model to answer your question in one streaming response, you just keep the response stream open and you read line by line, and each line start with some text like data semicolon followed by a JSON that is pieces of the answer. Okay, so the caller can have piece by piece answer by the large language model to be more reactive. And so each piece of response, I call it a chunk, and I pass to a chunk manipulator. And thanks to YARP proxy, what has happened that I get a request that YARP moved the request to litellm-proxy. And when the chunks start to arrive for a streaming response, instead of returning directly to the caller, I manipulate them to manipulate the response. This is done in the standard transform C# file, where I intercept the chat completion, and I simply try to get the response data. And if the response is a streaming response, I simply get a read a stream async, so I get a response stream, and then I start to read line by line of the response stream. And for each line, I'm dumping the answer to current chunk, to a string builder, so I can dump all the request and response detail, and it's interesting, we will see later. And if the string is null or empty line, I do something, and I use a chunk manipulator to process chunk. And if the processed chunk is different from the input chunk, it means that the chunk manipulator changed it. So I simply log chunk processing, and I simply then return the chunk to the caller. But now it's not the original chunk generated by my large language model, it's a manipulated chunk. So I can inject, it can change everything. The chunk manipulator is simple. If the chunk does not start with data or data done, simply return the original chunk. I want to leave the chunk intact as the same chunk passed. I simply transfer the chunk back to the caller. But if it starts with data, it's pieces of answer. So this code generated by Claude is simply remove data and use the check completion chunk. It's a simply C# class that helped me to deserialize the answer. And if the JSON serializer is able to deserialize the chunk data, I simply use some regular expression to understand if in the choices there are citation, okay? And that is a process citation in content. So what happened is I have a citation pattern because it's a number enclosed by square bracket. So if I have numbers enclosed by square bracket, the square bracket means you need to put the citation. And so I simply go into the citation area of the answer, and I'm simply putting the citation back with the markdown syntax. Okay, so it's very simple. So the code is really simple. And if the chunk is modified, I return the modified chunk. So what happens is I'm examining each chunk that contains a response. If the response text contains a number enclosed in square bracket is a citation, I substitute with the corresponding markdown with the real link. Okay, so I get the citation number. And okay, simply this, I prepend the CIT, so it's clearly that it's a citation. And then I join all the citation link in Markdown. So let's see in action. Now the proxy is running. I don't need to send anything in the context. I can say which library can I use to implement OpenID Connect in ASP.NET Core application. And I'm sending to PPX model, that is Perplexity. And if I send, if I press send, it is working. My proxy is starting to redirecting to litellm-proxy, that in turn redirect to Perplexity and come back. And as you can see, Perplexity as citation. So you see, I have sit3, sit3, sit1. So it is actually manipulating the actual result of Perplexity. And each time you see a number enclosed in a square bracket, understand that this is a citation. And so it is a real link. So you can click and you can see the result, the page that Perplexity is using to generate your answer. Okay, so you can see it finds something by the Microsoft MSDN, or you can find blog by some person. And that's important because actually I'm not using a large language model to generate code and to manipulate code. I'm simply using the chat for interacting with Perplexity to make a complex web search. And the nice thing is once I have this answer, I have right here in my Visual Studio Code, and so I can change model and continue refining. And so I can change model and say, okay, now move to GPT-5 and please implement this, blah blah blah. So you can continue, and the previous part of the prompt was generated by Perplexity, and I can continue with other models. So the nice thing is being able to manipulate the answer of a model allows me to basically set citation back into the answer. So when I search with Perplexity, I have an answer, and I maintain, as the original Perplexity does, the direct link to the sources that are used to generate the answer. And it's important for grounding. This is also nice because I told close to intercept all the chunk and dump to a file. So actually what I have, each request is done to my proxy, will be dumped to a file. So you see that instead it is indeed using the GitHub Copilot chat user agent, okay? And that is the prompt that is passed. Role system content, you are an AI programming assistant. When asked for your name, you must respond GitHub Copilot. So that's the prompt that the GitHub Copilot is passing to my large language model. And then at a certain point, my large language model start to answer. And so that's the response. The status code is 200, it's okay. And okay, this is the content. As you can see, it's a chunked response. So I have data semicolon, and then I have the first chunk, and the first content is the. So basically, it is generating one token at a time. And so if you go down, 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 you have a very, very long sequence of chunks. And here you are. This is a chunk in which I have a citation. As you can see, I have a number enclosed by a square bracket. And you see you have an array of citation, and all the citation are the URL that Perplexity used to answer. And so that's the classic citation. So I can manipulate this to generate a markdown that allow me to put a clickable link that basically allow me to just click the citation and being redirected to the direct site user to generate an answer. So basically being able to intercept and manipulate what GitHub Copilot is sending and receiving from a large language model is not useful only to allow you to call every model you can think of thanks to ollama interceptor, but also allows you to do a little bit more advanced scenario like this one in which you are issuing citation. And now that it's only up to your fantasy how much you want to expand this. Next step will be inserting some kernel memory code to just do a RAG, retrieval augmented generation, on all the electronic book that I've bought in my life. I buy a lot of book, and often I don't have time to read all. So sometimes if I'm looking for a certain argument and I want to study certain argument, it is interesting not only to do a web search, but searching in my books. Basically being able to manipulate, intercept the requests that a software like GitHub Copilot is doing to a large language model, allow you for some advanced scenario. One example is this, redirecting the research to Perplexity, and Perplexity gives you a citation, so you can manipulate the results. So the citation are given back in markdown format, so they can be shown inside your chat windows. And everything is up to your fantasy. The next step is connecting a small retrieval augmented generation application you can do as an example for doing RAG in all your electronic book. I buy a lot of book with Humble Bundle mainly, and I don't have time to read all. But sometimes I know that some subject, some argument, it's contained in some of the books. So it is nice not only to ask the internet with Perplexity, but to ask to my library, hey, do I have a book that talk about this argument? Because maybe I want to have a full reading end to end, a chapter of the book to have a clear idea of something. And it's up to you. You can redirect, you can do whatever you want. And so thanks to this simple interceptor in GitHub Copilot, believe that it is talking to ollama, instead it's talking to your code, and you can do whatever you want. I hope you like this video. Bye-bye. I'm waiting you for the next one.